Rupal, hi.
Hello, Richard.
How are you doing?
Good. Really great.
I'm just going to address people who are watching this, and we can maybe have a focus because it's Richard Brown. Obviously, you may know me as a property voice, and I'm being joined by the delightful Rupal Patel. Rupal,
Hello, everyone.
do you just want to give a little intro, maybe?
Yeah, so Rupal Patel, Director of Blue Infinity Property and founder of Entreprenora.
Yeah, that sounds exciting. I'm sure we'll get into that at some
Yeah,
point.
we will.
So we've connected a little bit, haven't we, over the past few months?
Yep.
And we thought, why don't we just do some video
Yep.
shoots on some
Definitely.
topics? So I think what we plan to do in this first one of the series is talk about what we might tell or what advice we might give to our younger selves, maybe
Yep.
if we're 18 or 21 years old, that sort of age group, right?
Yep.
I remember actually when I first talked to you on our podcast, you actually talked a little bit about this topic, didn't you?
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
where do you think where should we start with this topic of conversation?
Oh, there are so many things I wish my younger self knew or had realized. I think one of the big ones that keeps coming up again at every stage in life, and one of the things that I was lucky at that time in my life to have just happened naturally, is being very conscious of the people you let into your life. There's, a saying some people have heard, and I think of all the time about, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And so often what happens, especially when you're young, you just sort of, those 5 people who you spend the most time with, you're not very particular or choosy about it. It just sort of, mates that you play sports with or, people you get on with well at school, but you're not really thinking about the bigger picture and the influence they have on your life.
Yeah.
And like I said, I've gotten lucky that the people that I've always had the most time with have generally, with some exceptions, especially as, a young child and teen, have been pretty good influences. But I also know that when I had spent more time with the quote unquote bad influences, I did some pretty stupid things.
Yeah.
And so I think, just being thoughtful about the people we're spending time with is a big, big one for me.
Yeah, so the peers, if you like, or people we hang out with, that can be a really good influence or not so good influence, depending.
Definitely.
So I'm just thinking, when I was 18 to 21, that sort of age, that was kind of an age of like further education.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that comes into my mind is to get what I would call more like a real life education.
Yes,
So, not
definitely.
just, go through the formal academic system and maybe start to get, because we come from like property and investing and that sort of thing. That's our backdrop, so I guess. So, in terms of financial education, was there any financial education at school or in college? Or
Oh my God, no, never. And it's one of the life skills that I think is just, it's criminal that we don't teach it more formally in schools, especially starting from school age, because all of the, we have this weird stigma in the US and the UK around maths, and people think that math is scary or it's somehow unapproachable or it's sort of beyond mere mortals, but it's not. And basic arithmetic and just being comfortable with numbers is a life skill, and I think we have a lot of work to do to make people see the relevance of what we're doing, because math and money dictates so much of our lives, and we need to be well informed about how it works and feel comfortable with it in order to make the most of what we've got and what we do with what we've got.
Yeah, I mean, so surely the government's going to look after our best interests, and
obviously.
the big financial institutions. They're all
We know how that
best.
goes.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
So I think so. Where I'm going with that really is, it's the responsibilities on us.
Definitely,
so,
and our parents, if we're lucky enough to have parents who are switched on.
So we can input into our children, sound financial management principles, for example.
Yeah.
And if we don't have that backdrop, I didn't really have a strong backdrop in financial education at home or through the academic system. We can get ourselves educated, can't we? We can read some books. We can hang out with some people who know this sort of stuff. Actually, I was just thinking about books. Maybe we'll talk about books in another episode specifically. But one that was coming to my mind, maybe you've got some in yours. But there's 2 great books I would always suggest to people reading on this sort of topic. One is Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yep, classic. It's really good.
And there's one for teens as well, by the way.
Okay.
And then the other one is The Richest Man in Babylon.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes. Yep. Yep.
I may have stolen your book.
No, you haven't. No, you haven't. And I'm sorry, the reason I got so excited about both of those is because my dad, as I said, I was very lucky that both of my parents were very switched on and self-taught, but switched on about money and investing and saving and all of that. And a lot of it, what I learned was just by observing what they did, but some of it was through the conversations we had, and with my dad in particular. He's a reader, I'm a reader, and those two books were two books that he actually gifted me when I was 18. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I read at the time and I was like, I have no idea how this applies to me. And similarly with The Richest Man in Babylon, but then having revisited them a few years later, I realized how they're just so, as with most really powerful things in life, they're so elegant in their simplicity. And anybody who wants to get smart about money in a very easily digestible way, I think those two books are fantastic. Another one that I just recently came across is by a woman called Lois Frankel, called Nice Girls Don't Get Rich. Oh, really? And it's sort of, using the word nice girls in quotes, but the idea is that for a lot of women in particular, sort of being financially independent is not something that is always a reality. A lot of women end up leaving their careers when they have kids or following their husband's career, and it's sort of, there are a lot of things across, over a lifetime that interrupt their wealth building and their income generation. And the tips that she gives in this book are fantastic because it applies to every woman in every scenario, whether you're working, whether you're not. But it's some really great, easy to implement and easy to understand tips and ideas about how to get rich in whatever way that means to you. Exactly. Yeah. And I think some of it is also just what should be common sense. The biggest one is live below your means. Again, especially as sort of in those 18 to sort of late teens, early 20s. That's when we all generally get the first taste of money, of earning something, income from a job. And what so many people do is just live paycheck to paycheck. They splash out on the most expensive apartment they can afford, or cars or clothes or holidays. And it's exciting. You've got money coming in for the first time. You're your own person. But the key is to make sure that you're not ever spending more, well, definitely not more than you earn, and going into credit card debt and that kind of stuff, but also just being very careful about living below your means so you're not setting yourself up for failure for the long term.
So I agree with you. So live below your means. So, but I think aligned to that really is to save, isn't it?
Definitely.
So set aside. I remember when we spoke the first time, you were kind of encouraged strongly, if I remember.
Yes, basically forcibly encouraged. So the rules in our household was that whenever you got your first paycheck, at every job, half of it went to, after you cover your expenses, the remaining half went to charity, and the other your pension or your retirement. And we were also encouraged to contribute the most that you possibly could contribute to your retirement fund, whether it was through your workplace pension or through sort of a private pension, to invest for your future, because that was just the rule. And my first job I had at 16.
I was going to say, when was that?
It was 16, and I remember coming home, and I think it was like $250, which was a fortune at that time.
But then they took half away, right?
Basically, and it was sort of really annoying and frustrating at the time. And I was like, what the hell does my dad think he's doing? This is my money. But it was a great habit to instill from that time, because it then just became a habit. It just became the way things work. And to be honest, when you don't see the money, you don't really feel it sort of not being there. So the great thing about, sort of pensions and saving these days is that you can automate it, and set up direct debits or transfers or whatever it is, so that you don't even see the money before it's sort of taken away and being saved for you, which I think is a really important thing for most people. Is like, we're, ingrained to just burn through whatever we get. So, if you're not going to be disciplined enough to do it yourself and save yourself, just make it automated, set it up in your banker with, your pension or whatever it is.
Yeah, so I think, so living within your means, saving some money, and it's what you do with that savings as well, I think is important. So, but the most important thing, I guess, if I didn't do this, you see, you did do it, and maybe it was instilled upon you, but I didn't do it when I was that sort of age. But one of the best pieces of advice I think I could give anyone at that sort of age group is to start now.
Yeah,
start
100%.
then. Because as Warren Buffett says, it's not timing the market, it's time in the market.
Totally agree.
That counts. So if I'd have started investing, because we're talking about saving, what can you do with your savings? Well, you can save it. You may get a modest interest rate, let's say. But if you start to invest it, maybe you can get a better return. And if you even start talking about these things called leverage, we
can
actually grow our money into something else.
And that's the beauty of The Richest Man in Babylon. It's a very simple principle, the idea of having your money work harder and multiply for you. Sort of, I think that the metaphor he uses is having your children and your children's children make more children, the money just sort of multiplying in the way you invest it. And it's exactly right. It's, it's not enough to just save. You're not going to build independence and wealth by just saving. It has to be invested and thoughtfully and carefully sort of taken care of, as, all important things in our lives are, whether it's your health or your financial wealth, you have to invest time, effort in taking care of it.
So there's this thing I just touched on a little bit with the word leverage, really.
Yeah.
And so, what does it mean? I mean, for me, I'm just going to give my own definition.
Yeah, sure.
And pick up, but leverage for me means using other people's money to make your money go further. So you talked about a pension, for example.
Yep.
So if you are fortunate enough to have a company pension scheme, for argument's sake, your employer's putting money into your pension, maybe you're putting money into the pension, and that can multiply because of the two contributions instead of one. That's simple leverage, right?
Exactly.
You've probably got other examples.
Well, the beauty of leverage like that too is sort of tying that into something you said earlier about starting as soon as possible. There's leverage and then there's compounding, right? So when you're young, or whatever point you start, start now basically if you haven't done it already, but the longer you have in the market, there's this thing called compounding where, money invested, let's say it's earning 5%, that $100 in a year earning 5% becomes $105. And then that $105 is earning another 5%, which becomes 110 and 110.25 in the next year, and that's the thing. That's the beauty of compounding, is that the same amount of money invested over time grows because it's the amount that you've got because of interest rates and other things just is growing naturally and compounds and gets bigger and bigger and bigger without you really having to mess around with it. So when you're leveraging other people's money, let's say in this pension example, most employers will contribute some amount, and that amount, however it is invested, is going to compound over time as well. So you're making money from somebody else's effectively sort of free money. And it's growing at a faster rate because of compounding. So it's almost a no-brainer to not invest in like a pension scheme or something that, you're getting benefits from.
But I guess, I'm thinking to myself, if you're 18 or 21, you're going to be really switched on by the idea of a pension, sometime in the future that you can't even speculate, 60, 70, 80, years.
I think that's the thing, is that probably not, but that's what separates the people who become financially independent from the people who don't. And I think the problem isn't in the knowing, it's in the doing, right? So all of this sounds like great ideas, and all of this is proven to work. And if Warren Buffett is saying something, I mean, it's almost a no-brainer. The guy clearly knows what he's doing around wealth and saving and investing in things. But most humans don't learn from other people. If they're anything like me, you learn from your own mistakes and then try to sort of catch up.
But you make an interesting point there. I mean, perhaps I'll come back to the leverage point in a second. But the point about where you take your advice. So if, for example, you want to be in the top 1% of the population, I did talk about this recently about how much wealth you need to be in the top 1%. I don't know if you know the figure.
I don't.
Okay. So in the UK, on average, the top 1% is a net worth of 3.2 million to get into that club. So the point is, there's 99% who haven't got that kind of wealth.
Of course,
So if you want to be in the 1%, who do you listen to, the 99% or the 1%? So I think it's the idea of, getting the advice from the right quarters.
Yes,
the guy
definitely.
down the pub can give you advice, but
he's not qualified.
Do you want to be in that place? So anyway, I just drifted off into that. Sorry, but just to go back to my thinking about leverage. So we've got pension funds where we've got companies putting in contributions. We've also got the tax man. He can make a contribution in certain investments. A pension's one, and ISA is another one, for example. That's free money. So you should take that. I believe. And then the third one, I think we can probably talk about quite a lot in our circles, is like with mortgages and what I call good debt. So I don't know. Maybe you want to pick up on that a little bit.
So I guess the idea is, again, something I wish my younger self, or most of, all younger selves would sort of be able to appreciate, is the difference between good and bad debt. Bad debt is just debt for debt's sake, right? So it's sort of, buying something you can't afford and putting it on a credit card that is then accruing interest at 25 to sometimes, 80%. I mean, crazy rates, right?
And that's compounding working against you.
Exactly. And that's compounding definitely sort of keeping you stuck. And that is bad debt. Anything that is not creating productive assets or income for you. Whereas good debt is borrowing from, for example, a lender who, is giving you money so you can, buy a property that is then going to generate an income for you over time. And that sort of debt is productive debt because it's buying an asset that will probably increase in value over time, but also in the meantime is bringing in income. So it's not taking, again, this is sort of the simplicity of the rich dad, poor dad. Think of assets as anything that bring income in and liabilities as anything that cost money and take money out. And obviously all of this is going to differ based on your personal circumstances. And obviously neither one of us is an IFA or qualified to give sort of, specific advice yet.
Financial advice.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely not. But the idea is to just, again, be thoughtful about the type of debt you're going into, and is it productive, and is it bringing in income, or is it another liability?
Absolutely, perfect. Yeah, and I met a young man. I call him that, a young man. He's 19 years old. Last Friday, and he's active in property. And so he's 19. He's also got himself a mentor. Who's helping him, giving him advice and guidance. What do you think about that concept?
So I believe very strongly that to get to the top of your personal game, whether that's in physical performance, mental performance, business performance, everybody could benefit from a good mentor or coach. And this goes back to sort of the idea that you raised earlier about be careful where you get your advice from. You shouldn't be getting mentoring from someone who's never invested in property just because they're successful, right? So the idea is to get qualified advice from qualified people. So if you want to invest in property, talk to people who have successfully invested in property. If you want to invest in the stock market, talk to people who have successfully invested in the stock market and who can show you how they've been successful at it. And it's not just, them sort of advertising, oh, I'm an expert, but their own bank balances can prove that they are sort of, walking the talk and doing well with their own advice. But yeah, I think, again, no one would expect. Look, Andy Murray would not have won any Olympic championships if Yvonne Lendl wasn't there to help him. A lot of Olympic athletes or, the sports analogies I love because they're so applicable.
Relate, can't we?
Yeah, and I think for whatever reason, people think it's fine to have a coach to help you get to the top of your sporting game. But for whatever reason in business, it's almost seen as a taboo. Like, it's like, oh, why would you get a coach or a mentor? But if it's the right coach or mentor, they will help you both unlock your own potential, but then also help you shortcut some of the hurdles and the issues that you'll face along the way. And so
accelerate your journey.
Exactly. And accelerate, can mean instead of it taking you 10 years, it only takes you 8 years, right? We're not talking about fast tracking or sort of get rich quick, but it's the idea that someone who's qualified, who's been in the trenches before in that industry, knows things in and out and has a track record of success, can then help identify sort of the things that they got wrong and keep you from making those same mistakes.
There was a Business Insider article I read some time ago, and it talked about the idea of mentors. And I think they researched CEOs of top companies. I don't know if you saw this piece of research. You probably don't know what I'm going to say. But basically, I think the idea was 28%, this is the statistics, I might be slightly off. I haven't got it in front of me. I think 28% of CEOs said they use a mentor, which was actually quite a small percentage. But of those who did, I think it was something like 95%. It was a really high number. So, I'm guessing it's certainly a very high number. Attributed a large part of their success to their mentors. So I think what that tells me is it's maybe not for everybody. And maybe if you're a CEO, you maybe think you don't need help. I don't know. But anyway, so maybe it's not for everyone, but for those who it is for, it makes a world of difference.
Definitely. And I think, again, this gets back to the idea we talked about earlier on about the 5 people you spend the most time with. If that person is a mentor who is, helping you bring out the best in your personal performance, business performance, et cetera, you choose that mentor very, very carefully. Because if you are spending any meaningful amount of time with them, as you probably will in the relationship, then they can be a huge, huge asset. But it's making sure that you're choosing wisely and you're not just sort of getting it for mentorship's sake. And, I don't have statistics to back this up, but from anecdotal conversations that I've had with people who are founders of property businesses or other businesses, they all have had some degree of formal or informal mentoring, coaching, whatever you want to call it. They're slightly different, but often blend. it makes a world of a difference. It really does. But it has to be the right person. And you have to have the humility and the openness to be willing to take on board, some tough lessons, some tough feedback, and be willing to take that and go with it.
Well, I'm glad you talked about humility, because that's an example of a good value that we can have. I'm just getting a signal that maybe we're running a little bit short on time, Rupal, which is unusual for you and me.
I know,
right?
Gosh, we have nothing to say to each other.
So I don't know if you've got a parting thought.
Yeah.
I'll let you think about that. But my parting thought probably would be, one of my favourite quotations comes from a gentleman called Charlie Tremendous Jones.
Oh, wow. That's
Charlie
a name.
Tremendous Jones. What a name.
Yeah.
What a name. Charlie Tremendous Jones, who said, you'll be the same person as you are in 5 years, apart from the books that you read and the people that you meet.
Ooh.
Now, I could probably, in the modern day language, he said this a while ago, modern day language, that probably means, networks, the people that you meet. And then books probably means all sorts of learning resources. But I think that's probably going to be my parting thought.
I love that.
If you want to be different to how you are today, maybe in 5 years, get in the right company and consume the right information. That's probably my parting thought.
Cool.
What about yours?
I've got one that speaks a lot to me, is choose your goals not by what you will accomplish, but by who you will become along the way.
I like that.
So it's all about being very thoughtful about what skills will you have to develop, what sort of personal and internal hurdles will you have to overcome to meet those goals, targets, whatever you want to call them. But it's not about the result, it's about who you become along the way.
It is about the journey and who you become. I agree with you. So I'm just going to maybe close it there. What did we say we're going to call these little chats?
Two smart buddies.
Two smart buddies. That's two smart buddies who are talking probably a little bit longer than we planned to, but hopefully that's good content for you all. And thanks, Rupal, for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We'll have another conversation in a minute. Who knows?
Sounds great.
All right.
Looking forward to
You
it.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye.